So this part of the video is actually the second part to the introduction to formulas video that I have been making. And if you haven't seen it, you may want to go back and watch part one. But now we're continuing with part two, and we're going to get into dates, nested formulas, and relative cell references. This is an introductory tutorial, and we're going to go through this on the most basic levels. Like I said, if you understand the fundamentals in Excel, it really is much better when things get a little bit more complex to feel confident with your skill set. So the one thing I want to do here is let's just delete these out, but to start with dates. And that's because in Excel, fundamentally, we are using most of the time Excel with numbers, and then we may use it with other forms of numbers, so percentages, decimal places, things like that. But then dates and text are really the other two formats. Text is quite self-explanatory, but when it comes to dates, you can type something like 1126 into a cell and hit enter, and Excel is going to have a guess that that's a date and then display it in the format it wants to show you. Formatting is a whole other video that I'm going to create in the future, but there are different formats, and really quickly I'm just going to show you here that you can change the formatting of this date to a long date and a short date. And actually, if you really wanted to, you could click here and get into more complex forms of dates. And I'm not going to show you this here. This is a future video, so subscribe so you can follow along. You can get into more complex versions of displaying dates and other things down here in custom, which are actually really useful. But like I said, not to go into here. The next thing I want to show you that's useful when using a formula, you can simply pick a date, add one to it, and scroll down and copy down. So I just copied those cells down. You can do that in two different ways. One of the ways was I held shift, I then held the down arrow, and once I was finished, I'd hit control and down, and that copied the formula down. I'm going to talk about relative cell references later, which is why this formula works in the way that it does. The other way I could do this is simply take my mouse, grab this little square in the bottom right hand corner and drag that down. It will do exactly the same thing. But like I said, try to get away from using your mouse. If you want to become a really proficient user in Excel in the future, but look, if the mouse makes you happy and maybe Excel is quite a small part of your job, then maybe you don't need to become super proficient at using the keyboard. But I would start there, because what have you got to lose? The next thing I want to talk about here is that there are useful formulas in Excel, and I'm just going to come up with one, for example, now, just so you know and have an idea of what could come in the future. And there's a useful one called end of month that I use quite frequently, and what I do is I type it in. Then Excel tells me, and we've been talking about introduction to formulas here, so end of month is just a formula that I know. And now you know it as well. So maybe you will use it in the future because you're building up your repository of Excel formulas. And like I said in the first part of this video, is you don't need to memorize these formulas, and you definitely don't need to memorize how the inputs are, the order of the inputs, all this stuff, because Excel displays it to you. I am not filling my brain with that junk, that garbage, because I just don't need to remember it. So why would I do it? What I do need to remember and build my understanding of is when is a situation in Excel going to arise where I can use a formula that I know would be useful. The most common mistake that we are all making in Excel all the time, and I'm probably still doing it today, is I do something in Excel where I don't realize there's a formula there that can help me. I obviously know many, but I don't know them all, so I'm constantly also trying to learn myself. So then to finish this formula off, Excel is telling me I need a start date. And what this formula does, it actually returns to me the end date of a month after a number of months from a date that I picked. Here we go. So the first date, which is the start date that I picked, is the 1st of January 2026. Well, I then want to know what the date is at the end of that month. So I'm just going to say 0, because that's not 1 month ahead, it's actually the same month. And that tells me the 31st of January 2026. I go into this formula, perhaps I want to know what the date is in 3 months' time. I want to know what the date is at the end of the month in 3 months' time. Well, it tells me April, and it's smart because it knows that in April there's only 30 days, not 31. So there's lots of things you can do with dates in Excel. I encourage you in the future to build your knowledge of other dates, but this is actually probably the one I use the most when it comes to financial modeling. I find it really useful. The next thing we're going to talk about is nested formulas. And nested formula literally just means that we're nesting one formula in another formula. So you've got one formula and then we build a nest around it, and you've got a formula on the outside. we're going to explore one more formula in here. So that is not too complicated, but again, a common one, which may be useful to know here. But if it confuses you, like I said, this is not to start to get to grips with all these formulas. This is so you can start to feel more comfortable exploring formulas, because this is going to be an iterative process of learning for you. So the one that I want to talk about here is called an if. So I'm going to type if. I'm going to open my bracket. So now look, Excel tells me that I have these inputs I need to enter. A logic test, which you can see here, a value if it's true, and a value if it's false. An if statement, also another way of remembering what an if statement does, is actually to think of it as a true or false formula. It's going to tell you if something is true or false. So when it comes to this, I want to enter a logic test. A logic test can be the test that you're trying to decide on if it's true or false. So for me, I just want to know if this date here is before the 30th of April 2026. I'm going to then hit comma, because that tells me I'm done with that input. It's then going to tell me what do I want it to do if it's true. And for now, I'm just going to say, tell me true, right? So it's going to just display the word true. Comma, what do I want the formula to tell me if it's false? Well, just tell me for now that it's false. I want to close my bracket. I've ended my formula. I'm going to hit enter. And it's telling me true. So the logic statement is saying that if this date here, and again, you can see the colors make it really useful to see what your inputs are. So if this date here, the 1st of January, is less than the 30th of April, which it is, and they're both in the same year, then that statement is true. But if that statement was false, let's say for instance I made this by manually typing it in a date that was in 2025, then my formula automatically goes to false. And that's the power of formulas. There's automatic calculations that are happening that are changing depending on your inputs and your data that could be changing. So that's just an if formula, but that's not nested. And what I mean by nested is within this formula, I could decide that if this cell is actually before this cell, which it is, the date, then actually I want it to do something else. I want it to do a sum. I want it to add all these numbers up, because if that date is before the 30th of April, and this is really useful, so I forgot in this to tell the formula where the end of this new formula inside it, the nested formula, is, and it's come up with an error. We found a typo in your formula and tried to correct it, and it has not correctly corrected this. Where I need the bracket, I don't know if you can see it here, is after B19. So let's go no, and let's go OK. So it's going to let me correct it myself. So as you can see, this is really useful. I've made a mistake, which is I forgot to tell Excel where my formula ends, and it's telling me it doesn't know what to do. And the reason is I forgot to put a bracket in. So now that I've closed that bracket, Excel knows that this is a formula within a much bigger formula. And that's what I'm calling a nested formula. The sum here is within a bigger formula, which is an if. And we can do that multiple times. So now when I enter, it will work. So it's done two things. This formula has first of all done the sum here. It's then decided if the statement I want it to check is true and the date is less than the 30th of April. So then it's displayed what I wanted it to. Don't worry too much, but think about this in terms of the formulas on the inside are going to be done first, and then you're going to move further and further out. So there's an order of execution that's happening here. And the other thing I want to show you here is that this formula is working. So if I just go back and do what I did before and change this to 2025, it's going to hit false. So it's no longer doing the sum part or displaying the sum part, because the logic statement is actually false and not true. Like I said, don't get too confused, guys. And if statements will come to you so quickly once you start practicing them that it's not really worth trying to get too bogged down in the detail. You're going to have to use them in the future. Really slow down when you start to build Excel formulas at the start, especially if you're struggling. Get to understanding what's going on in them, even if it takes a little bit longer. And in the future, you'll prepare them so quickly, you won't have to keep getting confused and scratching your head every time you use them. It will just become second nature. So that's a nested if statement. That's nested formulas. And the other thing you can do, which let's just show you here, is just to also just add formulas on. So within here, I could just say plus, and then I may tail it to plus the sum of these cells here, close bracket. And it's just going to continue to do that. That's not nested because there is something splitting this. So these are kind of nested. It's all within one formula. This plus is separate, and then I've just added another formula on the end. So you can do that. Relative cell references. So I want to talk about something here, and I'm going to just actually copy some data over for us to play with. So let me just copy and paste that here, and then I'm just going to add some numbers here. So I'm just generating some dummy data for us to play with. So I'm going to copy it down. Copy it to the right. You can see all my shortcuts. I'm not going to explain them here, but if you're interested, just have a look. Let me just make more space so we can see what's going on here. Okay, so let's say I have this table and I have a sum. And this is summing as we wanted, a range above. And if we want to do the sum going across to the right, we could shift and arrow over, or obviously, like I said before, you can use this square to drag across. I'm going to hit Control and right, and the formula gets copied across. And the smart thing Excel does is when you copy a formula across, it updates the relative range of the formula. So if this was to be copied over exactly, this cell here would say 280, but that wouldn't be useful. So it's really smart in that sense. Let's say, for example, though, I wanted to actually have this formula below it. There's a really simple way, so I could just cut and paste that, and now I've got my total a little bit lower with a space in between. But let's just say for this example, I wanted to have the formula below and I wanted to copy it down. There is an issue that we run into here. So when I copy this formula down, you may have guessed the relative range of the formula copied the cells and moved it down by one cell. So now we don't have the 10, and we have now included the total that includes some of these numbers, which is not what we want. So one way around something like this would be to use the dollar symbol. And what the dollar symbol does is it fixes a cell so that actually these are no longer relative cell references. These are in fact fixed. So when I do something like this, it's actually fixed the row only. So right now it's fixed row 20 and fixed row 14. And what that means is when I copy it down, it does what I wanted it to do. It kept the rows fixed. But I didn't put the dollar symbol in front of the O's, and that's really important. If I put the dollar symbols in front of the rows, then this wouldn't work. So when I copy it to the right, look, the only part of the cell range that is fixed are the rows. There is still a relative or a dynamic cell reference when it comes to columns because I didn't fix it. And let me show you what I mean. So now if I go ahead and put a dollar symbol in front of the O's and copy that to the right, well, right now all these cells are just doing the exact same thing because I've removed the functionality from Excel for these to be relative cell references. It's no longer dynamic. It's literally a formula. I paste the exact same thing will happen wherever I take it. So let's go here and use a formula that we learned in part 1, Alt plus, and it's going to sum there, and we hit enter, and that gives us a nice number. We can copy these down, and because we're copying it down, we don't have any issue, and we're doing the sums across, which may be useful for some reason, but the issue will be when I copy this to the right, that look, it now actually copies in a number that actually already includes the total, which may not be what I want. So we're kind of trying to do the same thing as below. I'm just going to put a border around this so we can tell they are totals. So effectively I want to do the same thing as below. And the only reason I'm repeating this here is so I can show you a keyboard shortcut, which is if I come to this cell here and I want to use a dollar symbol, rather than going and trying to find the dollar and punching it in, I can hit F4 And when I hit F4, it will just fix that entire cell. If I hit F4 again, it's going to fix just the row. And if I hit F4 again, it's going to fix just the column. And that's exactly what I want. And I also want to do the same here. So I'm going to hit F4. I don't want to fix it totally. I don't want to fix the row, but I do want to fix the columns. If I do that, if I then copy this cell to the right, and I just used a complicated formula, which I'm not going to explain here. You can see it on the screen, but you can also follow me and watch the future shortcuts video. And I'm just going to copy this down. And there you go. It has fixed just the column, but the rows are dynamically moving. No, guys, that's it. That's the end of this video. It's a bit longer than I planned, but I hope you have a really solid introduction to formulas now, and you can get on with using and developing that range of formulas you want to use. Follow along. I'm going to be going through much more complex and useful formulas in the future videos. But look, guys, like I said, in my whole career of 15 plus years, I've probably used less than 20 formulas on a regular basis. And I'm going to be showing those to you. This is not a vanity exercise or a vanity channel where I'm going to jump in and show you every formula in the world. I don't personally want to learn them myself. I'm going to show you the ones that are useful to me, and hopefully in those videos you guys may comment on some new formulas that I don't even know myself, and I'll look into those if I think other people recommend them to me. You've got my website where you can subscribe to my newsletter to hear about future announcements and practice sessions I may run, so please go and sign up to that if that interests you. I wish you well in this Excel journey, and I think it's really exciting, but slow down, try not to feel too overwhelmed. But look, when you start something new, things feel a little bit resistant, feel a little bit difficult, and that's perfectly natural. And I'm going through that by making videos for this channel, which is something out of my comfort zone too. So there you go. I shall catch you in future videos.